Okay. All right. So our mission is to raise awareness of human and civil rights issues and to support students and community members in taking action. Hello? Okay. And we have been working with the Corrales and Palestine Solidarity Group. These are these folks that are going to be the speakers who are from that organization. This is our QR code, if anyone's interested in looking at that. And I'm just going to play a short video. But this will just take a second. Okay.
Allow me now to show you 5 maps. The first one is historic Palestine. This is the territory over which the Palestinian people should have been able to exercise their right to self-determination. Instead, the General Assembly recommended the partition of Palestine, ignoring the will of our people, as shown in the second map. With the Nakba that ensued, over 2/3 of our people were systematically and forcibly expelled by Israel, and 3/4 of Palestine became Israel, as shown in the third map. This was the start of the Nakba, the dispossession, the displacement and replacement of our people, the denial of rights and discrimination that continues to this very day. In 1967, Israel then occupied the remainder of Palestine, and from the first day of its occupation, started colonizing and annexing the land with the aim of making its occupation irreversible. It left us with a collection of disconnected Bantustans, preventing the independence of our state, as shown in map 4. Israel wanted the geography of Palestine, but not its demography. So it kept pushing our people out of their homes, out of their land. Here is the 5th map. It was displayed by Israel's Prime Minister to the General Assembly last September. He called this the new Middle East. There is no Palestine at all on this map, only Israel, comprised of all the land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This shows you what the prolonged, continuous Israeli occupation of Palestine is intended to accomplish.
So just to clarify, that video was from the Palestinian delegation speaking to the International Court of Justice last week, I believe, maybe 10 days ago, asking that they double down and not that any action has really taken place yet, but that they also end the demand an immediate ceasefire into Rafah, which is part of the Gaza Strip, where Israel is bombing incessantly right now. So.
Thank you. No, I think I should be good. Can you hear me well? Sounds like. So. First of all, thank you very much for having me here, and thank you, Will, for inviting us to LBCC. This is a great opportunity to meet different folks and communicate a little bit about the history of Palestine and how we got here to this point that you just saw in that video. One of the things I wanted to talk about today is give you kind of a historical view and let you know that history did not start on October 7th, and show you when did it start and how we got to this point. My goal is also to tie that back to how it affected me personally in terms of my family, where they come from, how they got affected by the Nakba and later on by the Naksa. So Nakba in Arabic means catastrophe. Naksa is another word for catastrophe in Arabic. Both of those, the Nakba happened in 48, the Naksa happened in 1967. These are wars that basically a continuation of this ethnic cleansing project that the Zionist regime has been undergoing from the beginning. So one of the questions that I kept grappling with is like, why does Israel exist? Why do we have all this push from the Imperial West to maintain this foreign entity in the middle of the Arabic world to basically do what exactly? Infamously, President Biden, while he was a senator a few years ago, he said the best $3 billion investment we make, where there were no Israel, the United States of America will have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. This is an important element that I also want to, as I go through the presentation, there is different colors of support, different ways of justification, different ways of turning the message in different shapes in order for them to justify the existence of the state of Israel. So this has been done at a great risk to President Biden. His numbers, the approval ratings, the support for the war in Israel have been declining. So as you see here in this poll, back in March, it went down from right after October 7th, where the attack of Hamas on Israel after, when they broke out of the concentration camp that we call Gaza. It went from 50% to 36%, yet he's still sticking with it. So why? We want to know and understand that. So in order for us to understand this, we have to go back a little bit in history, so to the 1890s. So in the 1890s, Theodore Herzl kind of put forward an ideology, a political ideology of Zionism, where the Jewish will have self-determination. This ideology came as a backdrop of pogroms that were happening in all over Europe, from Eastern Europe, mainly in Ukraine, all the way to Western Europe, Germany, France, as well as England to some extent. And these pogroms basically created kind of a living hell for the Jewish people in Europe, because they were being persecuted, they were being pushed everywhere. So with that light, Theodore Herzl wrote a book called The Jewish State, in which there was this quote where he basically described what he wanted to achieve, which is to build a Zionist state, a Jewish state on the land of Palestine. And that was from the earliest writings that he put in place, that was the ultimate goal. And his ultimate goal also was to displace the Palestinians from the land. So as you see here, this is the quote: "We must expropriate gently the private property on the estate assigned to us. We shall try to spirit the penniless population across the border by producing employment for it in the transit countries, while denying it employment in our own country. The property owners will come over to our side. Both the process of expropriation and the removal of the poor must be carried out discreetly and circumspectly." So that was baked into the process from day one, in terms of even before a state of Israel was even conceived at this stage. So a year later, in 1897, he pulled together the first Zionist Congress, in Basel, Switzerland, where everybody elected him as kind of like the lead and president of the Zionist organization. And from there, the project began. So from 1897 to 1903, the process of trying to get a sponsor, a patron that can support the Zionist movement to build a state in Palestine. So the first thing that they've done was to go to the Ottoman Empire Sultan, where basically they offered Sultan Abdul Hamid II over 20 million British pounds, which is equivalent to about $2.2 billion in today's money, to colonize Palestine. So even though the sum would have alleviated almost 20% of the Ottoman debt, the Sultan refused. They tried to get Germany to accept this offer and become the patron. Emperor Wilhelm II rejected it. So is Russia's Tsar, Nicholas II, as well. Same thing happened with President Félix Francois Forat. Did I get it? He basically also rejected the offer. At that point, they decided to look for an alternative. They basically were trying to get Palestine this whole time, and they couldn't. So they said, okay, if we can't get Palestine, maybe we can do it somewhere else. So they tried Cyprus. That failed. They tried Argentina. That also failed. They also tried Mozambique. That too failed. And then even the Sinai Peninsula, that was another option that they wanted to get. That too failed. And you wonder, it's like, what the heck is going on here? This is a Zionist movement that is going to these imperial powers, and they're just kind of picking and choosing which land they want to take, as if no people live there, that land doesn't belong to anybody, and they're just trying to pick like a piece of chocolate out of a box. But that's the other backdrop in the mindset of the colonial powers back in that day. You have to remember, back in 1897, up to that point of 1903, colonization was the thing in Europe. European powers will go to all these different parts of the world and colonize them. Happens here in America, South America, South Africa, Kenya, Algeria, Vietnam, Australia, New Zealand, and you go India, and you go on. And that, so when they're doing this thing, it's a normal process. It's it's like a typical thing that you do if you want to go and colonize a place, because you have a purpose and you have a goal. And then the Uganda scheme, that was in 1903. And the Uganda scheme is kind of an interesting situation, basically, where they managed to convince, or Herzl managed to convince the British to see if they can build a state in Uganda. The British at the time were kind of racist. So they were a group of people, colonists, living in Uganda. They did not want to be displaced by the Jewish colonists who were going to come in and displace them. So they were basically almost like a pushback from the colonists in Uganda that was already colonizing the place by the British, and that too failed. So as I said, it's like a game of Monopoly. It's they're trying to figure out where to move the pieces, and they have no regard to the people, the indigenous people of the respective countries. Then World War I happened, and that changed everything. The Ottoman Empire fell. When the Ottoman Empire fell, you basically have the entire property of the Ottoman Empire now became up for grabs. And the Zionist movement saw that as an opportunity where they can go in and capture the land of Palestine in the process. And they lobbied very hard, the different powers, both France and England, who were responsible for winning that war, and they became kind of like the inheritance, to divide the spoils of the sick man. That's what they used to call the Ottoman Empire. And they divided the land in between Iraq, Syria, between Iraq, Jordan, Palestine, and part of the Persian Gulf, so like Kuwait and other countries on the Persian Gulf. Those became part of the property of the British Empire, including Egypt as well. And France took Syria, Lebanon, some of the northern African countries like Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia. So they managed to split the land that way, and that was a great boon for the Zionist movement at the time. So they immediately start lobbying the British Empire to now get their hands on Palestine. Sykes-Picot is the kind of like the infamous agreement that was done between the foreign ministers of both of England and France, and it was, you know, without any consultation of the people who living on that land. They were just doing these backroom negotiation and agreements. Come 1917, Balfour Declaration. That's when the whole thing clicked in place. They brought in Lord Balfour, who basically was also a racist and anti-Semite. He basically agreed to give the land of Palestine to the Zionist movement. And I would like to read the declaration. What you're seeing there, that is the entire declaration. It's like a one paragraph, and that changed the world as we see it. So His Majesty, the government viewed with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. And that's how they refer to the indigenous people, the non-Jewish. They're not, you know, they did not give them any entity, any characteristics, any identification. They were just the other. That's how they defined them. So from that point on, British looked at this project from a strategic and geostrategic point of view. It basically provided the British kind of a buffer east of Egypt to maintain control over the Suez Canal. So they wanted to have a way to maintain that control. That's a strategic goal for them. And it basically was one of the main reasons for getting Palestine, is to make sure that you control the west flank of that important channel. They wanted to ensure contiguous land route from the Gulf to the Mediterranean, and that was also another trade route in addition to the Suez Canal. And they finally wanted to establish a Jewish homeland, which answered the Jewish problem. And this goes back to my statement earlier about the anti-Semitism of Lord Balfour and many people in the government of Britain. They wanted to solve the problem, move the Jews out of Europe into this homeland away from Europe, from Western Europe. And that was in 1917. And that was what they call Mandate Palestine, where now the entire historic Palestine now is under the control of the British Empire. So to prepare the Palestine for the Zionist takeover, the British government, or the British occupation, did few things. For example, they created a shadow government agency for the Zionist movement to start taking control over the land. They created the ability to raise funds and financial supports through bonds and other means. They provided military support, training, and they also helped in crushing the resistance from the indigenous people of Palestine. And they also provided full access to land in Palestine everywhere and anywhere possible. So that was what the imperialist Britain did to support and bolster the Zionist movement. So between 1945 and 1948, there was a lot of, let me go back a little bit. From 1917 to 1948, there was a lot of pushback and a lot of revolt from the Palestinian indigenous people in Palestine. And I want to highlight one thing. The indigenous people in Palestine, they're not all Muslims, by the way. There are Muslims, Christians, Jews, different religions. It was like the original melting pot where people go there. And there was, from 1936 to 1939, there was a revolt. There was a huge revolt where basically all the Palestinians started to take up arms and push back on both the Zionists as well as the British. The British took a very draconian approach in suppressing that uprising. They brought in all their over 200,000 troops. They brought in different organizations from India, from their military, from India outpost in Kenya. In the Kenyan one was interesting because they have perfected concentration camps there. So they built concentration camps inside Palestine to contain the revolt. They de-armed all the Palestinians and, of course, provided arms to the Zionist regime. Because of that revolt, it ended up being a huge problem that they had to kind of deal with it. So they came up with this convoluted plan to divide Palestine between the Jewish state and Palestinians and the Arabs. And without going through all the details, just look at it and see how complicated it is. It's needlessly complicated. But the point that I want to bring up to you here is the population distribution. The settlers that came to Palestine grew from like 8% to 30% by 45. And they were given over 70% or 50% of the land at that point in time. Of course, the Arabs did not like that. I mean, who would appreciate, somebody coming into your land, taking a big block of it, and then saying, okay, let's reach an agreement, let's not fight. I'll take 50% of that, and you should live with it. Of course, no red-blooded American would accept that. No red-blooded Arab will accept it either. But as a result, it got us to the 48. That is basically the Nakba. What happened is that after all the pressure that England was under, they decided to leave it to the League of Nations and get out of Dodge. And in the process, they started handing over the control to the Zionist movement that has been incubated throughout this period. And when they were doing that, they basically created a huge catastrophe. They were going, the Zionist movement were going, flushing and, to all the villages, over 500 villages, over 15,000 people got killed. It was basically an entire movement to push out all and cleanse all those villages from their native inhabitants. That created over 700,000, 750,000 roughly of ethnically cleansed refugee problem that they migrated everywhere to avoid the slaughter and the massacres that they were committing. They went to Jordan. A lot of them went to Gaza. A lot of the people who are trapped right now in Gaza are refugees from 48. So there are a lot of refugee camps. And they went into the West Bank. King Abdullah, the senior, held up the West Bank. And the Zionist movement at the time did not decide not to take over the West Bank in their kind of advance and ethnic cleansing. So a lot of Palestinians moved into the West Bank. So a lot of these major cities like Jenin, Khalil, Hebron, Jenin, even Jerusalem, there are camps that hold and host a lot of these 48 refugees. So is Lebanon and Syria as well. So whenever they celebrate the establishment of the state of Israel, the Palestinians celebrate the Nakba. Or not celebrate, but mourn the Nakba. So how does that affect me? So aside from the ethnic cleansing of many of the Palestinians, my family actually is from the Tul Karam, which is in the West Bank. And it's Tul Karim is think of it as a small little city or a county. Part of that county is a village called Zeta, which is where I'm from. And our village basically straddles the apartheid wall, and I will talk to you a little bit about that. So this is Zeta, if you can see that. So Zeta is right here. Can you see my marker? Good. And the West Bank is this little dotted line that you see here. And Jerusalem obviously is here. So Tul Karim is like right here and Zeta is above it. And I had to go to Google to get a picture of my old hometown because I don't have a picture of it. I've never been there. And as you see, Zeta has an interesting story, at least for me. My family, my mom and dad are both from Zeta. My dad's family are on the east side of the wall. And when they decided to build the wall, they bisected Zeta. And my mom's side of the family and their land is on the other side of the wall. So any family member who wants to go work the land, they have to go through the checkpoints. And that is a nightmare, basically. You might not be able to go to. And in some cases, they close the borders or close these checkpoints during the harvest season. So a lot of the fruit and things will wither and die on the vine. And these are the biggest terrorists that you'll see in your life. That's my mom and dad. That's the story actually when they got married. In 67, before 67, in 63, the border between Zeta and Jordan was open. So you can go drive from Jordan all the way to Zeta and back. So my dad, because of the refugee situation that happened in Tul Karim, he could not sustain the family and pay for everything because of the refugees and all the economic depression that happened because of the war. So he lived in Kuwait. So he moved out to Kuwait, made a living there, and he will send money back to the family. And at 63, I think, he went back home, got married, took my mom back to Kuwait. 3 or 4 years later, 67 happened, and they closed the border. So my grandmother stayed behind. She could not leave. Later, when her health became a problem, they managed to get her out because that was now occupied territory, and she could not leave because of that. And this is something that I want to emphasize here. We don't have the right to return back to our home. So this is actually part of the definition of ethnic cleansing, is that you can't go back to your home. So now, this was basically prior to 67. And I want to zoom in a little bit as you see it closely. And that's the apartheid wall. My mom's family is here in their land, and my dad's family's land is here. And when they built these walls, by the way, that was by design to take more land. Actually, they will come in and figure out where the line is, and they move it a few miles. And they don't have to do it a lot. They do it, very effectively when they go down and build the wall. They keep taking more and more and more. Right? And if you want to see what it looks like, this is a picture I took. I used to go to work in Tel Aviv as I worked with HP. And one time I went to Jerusalem and to Bethlehem. And this is the gate at the Bethlehem apartheid wall. And what you're seeing here in this side, these are like the massive places where the Palestinians get trapped and stay there for hours and hours if they want to go back and forth between the two cities. And I was on a street that only Israelis can drive on. You have to have a special tag, you have to have and I was privileged because I had an American passport, and I was in a bus that was run by an Israeli company. So as I was approaching the wall, I was looking at this cattle, cage that they were putting these folks in, and it dawned on me that this is unjust, this is humiliating, this is crazy that is happening this way. Okay. Few good resources I would recommend is, and these are YouTube videos. They're like about an hour, hour and a half each. The Catastrophe 1948. This was done really well. Ilan Pappy is one of the, I think, contributors to this documentary. This one is also another good documentary that I also recommend, called The Road to Apartheid. It basically puts side by side the African apartheid next to the Palestinian and Israeli apartheid. And you can see the differences are very stark. All right. That's it. Yeah. Thank you. If we want to do a quick Q&A, I think we'll do it after, unless there's a burning question.
Videos are handy for mics too. See if this works. Can you hear me? Probably not. I'll just hold it. How did you do it?
Just, you can.
I'll just do this. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Loai. So my name is Andrea, and I am also a member of Corvallis Palestine Solidarity with Loai and some of you out in the audience. And I wanted to kind of start when Will offered this or asked us to speak. Will mentioned that this is a human rights club, and I was like, oh, like human rights in college and law school is one of the things that led me to working so much for, or working on the issue of Palestine for so long, and becoming extremely enraged and energized and motivated to continue the work. So I just wanted to briefly start this by showing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which isn't working. I can just emote now because it's being recorded. Okay.
If you
Away. Oh,
still here.
does that? Oh, I was like, I'm sorry. Okay, thanks everyone. Okay. So I just wanted to start with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights briefly. It is 30 rights, so it's not super brief, but just as we're talking and as Loai just spoke, like noticing all of the rights that are not being upheld at all or universal in the situation when it comes to Palestine and life in Palestine. So this is the first 10. I'll quickly, sorry, but equality, freedom from discrimination, right to life, liberty, personal security, freedom from slavery, torture and degrading treatment, right to recognition as a person before the law, right to equality before the law, right to remedy, right to freedom from arbitrary arrest and exile, fair public hearing. Like none of these, well, we'll go through it a little bit, but these are some of the rights that Loai even just mentioned. To be considered innocent till proven guilty, free movement, asylum, owning property, religion, peaceful assembly, rest and leisure, education, etc. So just keeping in mind some of these, I know it's a lot of rights and maybe you all are learning about them or already know them, but for me, when I first started in college learning about this, we watched a documentary called Occupation 101, which I also recommend as a helpful resource, and alongside all of these rights. And it was a really helpful introduction to apartheid in Palestine. And as I mentioned, we're part of Corvallis Palestine Solidarity. This is just a little plug, but also just to let you know, through that group, there was an opportunity that was presented recently. One of the members had done a lot of activism and solidarity work for Palestine over the years. And one of their colleagues had asked for anyone who they were in desperate need of volunteers, given the lack of travel to the region since October 7th. And so 2 of us from the group ended up going to Palestine recently. And I'm going to talk a little bit about well, not really about my time, but what I saw there. I'm not going to talk a lot about the volunteer work, but more about kind of the life on the ground. So I went to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is where I was staying for the duration of the time. We were in Jerusalem for a couple days, but I went to Bethlehem, and this is Bethlehem. This is the part of the apartheid wall that Loai was talking about. And it borders the entire West Bank. Like Loai said, the wall that was built between his parents' land, for example. So it's obviously there's a lot of art, there's a lot of messaging on the wall. There's also a lot of barbed wire and guard towers about every 200 meters in Bethlehem, at least. And so this surrounds kind of, everything in the West Bank. And so that was really shocking to me, as I had grown up hearing of Bethlehem, being like, oh, little town of Bethlehem. And then entering it I took a Palestinian taxi into Bethlehem, and it was a shocking entrance. And then once we got away from the wall, there was life and beauty and flourishing. But we had to walk by. I walked by daily to go to a location that I would spend time at. Okay, so part of what
Yeah.
why is the mic freaking me out so much? Okay, I'm just gonna talk.
Yes.
That's working?
It's working.
Oh my God, this is totally counterintuitive. Thank you. And also, I'm sorry, I'm a little flustered today in general. But okay, thank you for doing that so early on, because that would have been rough. It was already. Okay, so just going through some of the things I learned when I got to Bethlehem. Obviously, the wall, the guard towers, the checkpoint, that was just like shocking enough. But then when I arrived and I met with some folks, they were talking to us about, they started a museum in Palestine called Palestinian Museum of Natural History. And right when I got there, the founder, who's brilliant geneticist and biologist and professor, he was giving an interview with an Italian newspaper, and they were asking about the way the occupation has impacted the ecology and the environment in Palestine. And one of the first things he mentioned was as soon as Israel took over control, what Loai was referencing with 1948, that they also took over control of the water. That was the first thing he said that they wanted to do, and to ensure like control over the people, was taking control of the water. And as I was listening in on this interview, which was a great first day to just kind of get caught up and learn so much about the land and how the occupation is affecting it, they mentioned that even the rainwater, Israel says they own the rainwater that falls over Palestine, that falls over the Bethlehem. You cannot capture it, you cannot access it, it's their water. You also get access to the water one day a month, at least in Bethlehem. And I'm not sure if that's the full West Bank, but anyone can correct me. But in Bethlehem, you get water one day a month. They fill up their cisterns, like big buckets, jugs, containers, tanks, thank you, containers of water. They're on the roofs of all the houses. And that's your water for the month. This picture here is from the Banksy Museum. Banksy, as you all might know, the artist. Banksy has a lot of presence in the West Bank, and specifically in Bethlehem. There's a museum, a Banksy museum, that's super educational and amazing, and it's right at the wall, and it's connected to the Waldorf Hotel, which is also a very fancy hotel right at the wall, right at the guard post. So or guard tower. So it's kind of this shocking juxtaposing of like abundance and like kind of lavishness inside of this museum or this hotel. And then right outside, you're surrounded by guard towers and a wall. So anyway, this museum, they were so happy to have a visitor because since October 7th, there haven't really been any tourists coming in. And so and Bethlehem, as you can imagine, is a tourist town. And so I went in and was able to tour through. This is a picture of an Israeli water pipe versus a Palestinian water pipe. A picture that I took at the museum, they have captured this. And so the folks I talked to about the water there told me that not only are the pipes, as you can see, very different, and they're also, the water is taken from different depths. The Israeli water is from 300 meters down, and the Palestinian water is from like 700 to 800 meters down. It's just siltier. It's just not as fresh. And at the museum, they use a ton of gray water, and taught us all how to just make sure to like not waste any of that water that we have for the whole month. So the next kind of ecological impact that we learned about was around olive trees, which I'm sure many of you have heard of or seen, like even in keffiyehs, right? Like that there's, the olive trees are a huge part of Palestinian culture and representation of Palestine, like the olive branch being like a symbol of peace, and the keffiyeh pattern of the olive tree leaves. And so everywhere we went, there were just olive trees everywhere. It was beautiful to see. But when I was at the museum reading this placard that some trees are 4,000 years old, I was just like totally blown away and even more heartbroken when I witnessed and learned about and see on the news so much lately, Israel just carelessly and intentionally, violently destroying olive groves and burning olive trees, and how long these trees have withstood all of the changes in regimes and occupation over the years in this land, and yet these trees that are being burned down today have lived through all of that, and it's extremely heartbreaking. So unfortunately, I wasn't there during harvest season, but I heard a lot about that. But I will go on to the Israeli government. Part of what the Italian reporters were there for was to hear about, Israel was trying to propose like a national park, and this was like their way of getting more land. Like I was saying, they keep kind of just taking more land, and they're doing it now through this like national park or national land and designating spaces as theirs. And then once they designate as state land, then nobody can build on it, and the Palestinians, everybody has to leave it. And then they leave it that way for a little while, and then they turn it into either, according to what I learned there, a military outpost or a settlement. And so it was kind of like a way to take more land, designate it, and turn it into whatever they wanted to anyway. While I was there, they were trying to turn a UNESCO heritage site that was Palestinian into a national park for Israel. And that had not been approved, but there was a lot of tension around that happening when I was there. And believing the professor I was listening in on, he believed that they would immediately turn that into a settlement. And it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so it's like very precious land and meaningful history on that land. And it was just a really strong reminder. He kept saying, like, you know who the indigenous people are to the land by how they're treating it, and how hurtful Israel and the occupation has been to the native trees and plants and waterways that have been there for thousands of years. This is from the Banks Museum as well. This is just one example of like 100-year-old tree being uprooted to make way for a segregated road. Okay, so this is another part of the Bethlehem Wall. There's a lot of amazing art happening on the walls there, and most of them do tell a story of some sort or have a lot more meaning. So this is Ahed Tamimi, who's a Palestinian activist and person who's also just a college student. And she had written a book a few years ago. There's lots of great YouTube videos out there about Ahed and her family. Her dad has been imprisoned off and on for her whole childhood, and most recently he's been imprisoned for a few years, and they haven't had any contact or any updates on where he is. But I reference her because she's someone who I've read a lot about. My daughter, my 13-year-old daughter, has read a lot about her and was really connected to her. But then when the war in Russia and Ukraine broke out, she got kind of more famous because there was this infamous photo that was put all around Western media saying this Ukrainian girl is confronting a Russian soldier. And everyone was applauding her because she's this little blonde hair, blue-eyed white girl attacking an evil Russian soldier man. And it's actually Ahed when she was a kid, and this soldier, well, I don't know if it was this soldier, a soldier had just shot her cousin in the head with a rubber coated steel bullet. And she witnessed it and went over and slapped a soldier. When the media learned that actually this is not a Ukrainian girl, this is actually a Palestinian, like take it down. And it totally got like silenced and everyone moved on. And this happened in 2012. Like this is her whole life has been just this, but it's also been ignored that long. This was the first time I ever saw it in any sort of news report, even if it was accidentally. So I just wanted to again point out just like the disparity in how the Western media is ever giving information about Palestine, and especially currently. So more from the Banks Museum, I swear, is so informative. I think it would be so great for many a field trip. But speaking about the wall, so I studied in law school, I studied human rights law. I did a study abroad in Northern Ireland because they had an occupation. The British are still occupying Ireland, right, in Northern Ireland, and lots to study there that kind of was similar to what's happening in Israel and Palestine. And I wasn't able to go to Palestine for my study abroad. And so I went to Ireland. And while I was there, we were learning a lot about the wall and how it had been declared illegal like 20 years ago, right? It's never been a legal wall, but international human rights law has declared it illegal, has declared the settlements illegal, has declared most of what Israel does illegal. And even as you're seeing now, if any of you are following, I'm sure you all are, because you're all here, but that it doesn't seem like the international law and all that we've agreed to, and especially Universal Declaration of Human Rights, none of that is actually being applied to Israel's behavior, nor to the US behavior. So, but, and because the US is the major funder of the UN, it's like, seemingly everyone is beholden to what the US says there. But back when I was studying it, I remember there was this whole section in our textbook about the wall and about Israel. And I was so excited. I was like reading the homework ahead of time, or not ahead of time, the class before, and then go to class the next day. And I was studying abroad with a law school, Fordham University in New York City. And when we got to that section, I was so eager to learn, like, how are we justifying this? What are we doing here? And the professor just skipped over the whole section on Israel. And I was like, oh, wait, like, I really want to learn about this. Like, I don't understand. Like, how do we even deal with this? And how are we even pretending like the UN is anything if we're not even applying all of its declarations? And then like the whole class got silent. I remember the professor being like, how's everyone feeling right now? Are you okay? And I was like, what is going on? Because I was coming from U of O Law School, but I was visiting Fordham, but I'd never been to New York City. And I was like, what happened? And then the professor asked the whole class, do you mind if I answer her question? I'm not going to fully answer it, don't worry. And everyone's like, well, I mean, I guess that'll be okay. And I was like, what? And then he said, well, I'm sorry, a lot of the students in this class have Israeli citizenship, and it's just really, really offensive to be asking these types of questions about someone's country. And I was like, well, we just did a whole unit on Guantanamo Bay, which is US human rights violations. I have US citizenship. I am thrilled to be learning so that I can apply the law and do better. And like, you know, you didn't ask my permission to talk about all the US violations, right? Like, what are you doing? And then this one guy raised his hand. He was like, I'm getting really uncomfortable. Can you tell her to stop talking? And I was like, you assigned this chapter. So I was shut down and I was definitely like the pariah for the rest of that study abroad for like international human rights law. Like even in that class, we're not getting I wasn't getting like to dive into Israel, to dive into Palestine. So it's extremely hard to learn about all of this stuff. So I'm glad you're all here. But so I just want to make it really clear, like as confusing as it is for me to have a slide up that says the wall is illegal, and the wall is obviously still there. So there's a lot of work to be done, but the more you know, the more you learn, the more you protest, like hopefully this starts to change. As Loai was saying, this is a quote from the main architect of the wall saying that the government told him, the government of Israel said, make sure to like keep as many Palestinians out, keep as many Israelis in. When I was in Bethlehem, there's a checkpoint 300 that goes into Jerusalem. When I was there, they were like, even when I was there, the locals were like, I think they moved the checkpoint in like a foot. And they were just like taking land like bit by bit, like while I was there, just at like basically like a kiosk, like moving it. And I was like, what the heck? Like there is no end to the grabbing of the land. So many of you might have been seeing like watermelons as symbols of Palestine, or being really confused why watermelons are so trendy right now. So this is also obviously from the Banksy Museum. And so Israel banned after the Naksa, which Loai was talking about in 1967, Palestinian flag was banned from the land. And even it says here, it's very small print, but even in the 80s, into the 1980s, red and green paint could be confiscated. And then, so in creative fashion, Palestinian fashion, they're like, watermelons are the same colors as the Palestinian flag. We're not allowed to paint the flag. We're not allowed to have the flag. So we'll just have watermelons be kind of our like symbol. And then they started saying it was illegal to have watermelons and you can be arrested if you had a watermelon. So this here in the fine print is like, as recently as 2016, a Palestinian man was detained in Hebron for 4 hours for carrying a watermelon until he was finally released. But because people were like, what are you doing? Arresting him for having a watermelon. So that's the watermelon symbolism. It's to show like these are those same colors, and it's also like the creative resilience, like continuing to both show Palestinian creativity and Israeli ridiculousness with like how they're so desperately trying to control the narrative there and everything else. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about a refugee camp that I went to in Bethlehem. Though I mentioned these refugee camps, many in Gaza, many in the West Bank. They were created in this one was created in 1948. Most of them were because that was when a lot of people were forced to flee their homes and were relocated. Originally, they were relocated into UN, because at the same time, the UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, UNRWA, which has been in the news a lot lately, they were also created alongside Israel, basically. So the state of Israel, because it would inevitably create a need for funding and support of all those displaced and impacted by the creation of Israel. So UNRWA covered, funds the refugee camps, many of the schools, many of the hospitals and clinics, etc. Like roads, different things all had like UNRWA signs on them. So this is one in Bethlehem called Dehesha Camp, and it was originally like tents. Like when I heard the word refugee camp, I was told to go get children for a field trip at the refugee camp. I was expecting like, hey, canvas tents. This is going to be like new for me. And it was just cramped buildings, like apartment buildings, like apartment towers, because it's been since 1948. So they were tents originally, and then they're like, this is taking a very long time. We cannot sustain, like tents are not sustainable anymore. So they built some, modest housing. And then all the housing has rebar on top of the roof, and they just keep adding another floor because everyone is having children and growing and having families and still waiting to return to their homes in the villages that they were expelled from. So this is the entrance to Dehesha camp, and this is like the declaration that the UN made in 1948. And it says, that at the earliest possible date to return these folks to their home. and that there would be compensation for them, that if they don't want to return, they would be paid for the value of their home that they didn't return to. And I think this was, you know, well intended in 1948, but now it's 2024 and they're still there. And the refugee camps are definitely the more economically depressed in the city as well. So this gate was the entrance to the camp, the original entrance to the camp. Before it would be staffed by or guarded by Israeli military officers, soldiers, and they would there's like a turnstile. I think I have. There's like a turnstile inside, and you would go in and out that way, and that was the only entrance and exit. And my friend who was showing me around the camp, who's born and raised there, he told me that within this cage, the soldiers would just choose to close it whenever they felt like it and open it back up, and that many women gave birth in this cage because they would shut it while they were going in labor, trying to get to a hospital. And I was like, yeah, it was unbelievable. So as you can see inside, Loai talks about the right to return, and you might have also been seeing a key as the symbol of Palestine, Palestinian identity. So these keys are all hanging in that gate now. Obviously, it's defunct. It's not the entrance anymore, but it's more symbolic with the keys from the original homes, and then these little white signs, tapes, are the villages that these folks were coming from, and these are their keys. This is a picture of in the homes in Bethlehem that weren't in the refugee camps. Well, I guess I just didn't go into many houses in the refugee camp, but I saw these keys. These would be the original ancestral key framed on the wall, waiting to use it again when they do return home. And I don't think everyone I talked to was very seemingly very matter of fact about the keys, being like we're going home, and they're waiting to go home. But it's very long. It's been a very long process. So this is just some graffiti in the refugee camp. I just thought it was creative and interesting. Walking through this space was amazing how packed and condensed it is. And the folks who showed me around, so they were just, we're all born and raised in the camp. One of them, so Palestine is, the Mediterranean Sea is on the West Coast. And in the West Bank, it's the West Bank of the Jordan River, right? So it's not it's not on the west side of Palestine. So the people in Palestine, the ones at the camp, they told me that day that they had never seen the sea, even though it's right there. They'd never seen the sea. And they were in a group in a Zapka dance troupe, like a traditional dance group. And they went to Denmark, weirdly, Denmark had a Zapka festival or something, and they were able to leave and go there when they were 13, and they saw the North Sea, and it was the first time they'd ever seen the sea. And they were like, it's much colder than the sea we want to see, we want to go to, the Mediterranean, but we'll take it. And it was just a really sweet story hearing about their time finally seeing the sea, even if it wasn't the sea they were seeing. So all of these containers on the roofs, those are the water cisterns that I was referencing. So those are on all of the rooftops in the area. And the guys were telling me that the IOF will come in at night and cut the electricity. And so Bethlehem no Israeli citizens are allowed into Bethlehem. Bethlehem is this special part of the West Bank, the Area A, where Israeli citizens just can't come and go. Israeli soldiers can and Israeli police can, but the citizens aren't allowed in. So it's kind of lovely in that way, where you have the settlers can't come across the wall here. In other parts, there's area A, B, and C, there's different rules, and different infrastructure is controlled differently by Israel. So in area A, IOF does come in pretty much nightly and does nightly raids on the most vulnerable, which are usually the refugee camps. And they were telling me that these water tanks, it's a very dry, hot place, right? And the water's already only coming once a month, coming from these tiny pipes. And they would come in and shoot holes in these cisterns. And they were saying you had to decide to go out and try to save the water and then maybe get shot because you'd be coming out, or just like watch your water go. And that was, and I asked, like, what do you do to patch up the water? Like, how do you fix your tank? And they were like, there is no fixing the tank, you just have to get a new one. So it's pretty rough. So these are more murals from the Haisha camp. And I guess this slide is mostly to show what struck me a lot in Palestine in general, and even in Jerusalem. It was this feeling of like the soldiers hunting young men, hunting Palestinian men. Like you could feel it around you, that they were kind of just coming for the boys, coming for the men. And at the camp, there were so many. This middle picture, for example, these are 3 pictures, obviously, but this middle picture is like one of the hundreds of murals of martyrs, people that have been killed by the soldiers in the camps. And then the words around this this man's face are names of people they didn't paint on that wall. So other people that had been killed. And then this guy on the end, some of them had more of these like plaques, like his, like from 2015. But he was someone who, his story was just powerful for me. But all of the stories were powerful, and the guys were saying them so quickly, like so almost, not casually, but like they're like, oh yeah, I went to school with that person. Oh yeah, that's my cousin. And like you walk through, it's like a family portraits all over the walls, but it's all the people that have been killed by soldiers indiscriminately. And this boy was one of them as well, who my friend told me was like his mom had like 4 daughters and then finally had a son, and he was like everyone's precious like gift to the community. She was like so in love with him and so obsessed with him, and everyone was just so glad for the family to have him. And then he was killed, and the community created this more permanent kind of placard. And later when we were walking through the camp, like I talked to my friend about this guy a lot, and then later when we were walking through the camp, we ran into a woman, and it happened to be his mom. And the whole time I was in Palestine, I didn't really like access emotions because I was worried I would like start crying and never stop or something. And in America, watching the news and stuff and being involved in protesting, I like release emotions daily, I would say. But when I was there, I felt like I was just like kind of had to like turn off that part of my brain. But when I met his mom, I was like, and when my friend told me like, oh, that's that guy's mom, actually, because she said to him, I said, what did she say? And he was like, oh, she said, take care of her, keep her safe. And I was like, what? And I just like all the emotions started finally coming. But sunglasses on and think it was fine. But it was just another just amazing moment of like, if Israel killed my son, like if anyone killed my son, it would just be so hard for me to imagine just going on and like blessing others with peace and safety. And this morning he texted the friend that took me around. He texted me this morning. He texts me like every day, like, oh, they came in and they raided this house or they took this. But this morning he said they took 8 people. And last week they had, or no, on Nakba Day, they had May 15th, they'd come in and the soldiers robbed the Western Union, which is like their main and what's it called, money exchange, currency exchange. So they stole the money from the Haisha camp, which is like a refugee camp, already broke. Bethlehem is so economically deprived right now with no tourism, no day labor access into Israel, which was their second means of income. And then to raid the Western Union and take all their money, and they put a sign on the door that says, this organization funds terrorism. If you use it, you will be treated accordingly. And that's like, when folks in Bethlehem are like, if we need to send them money, it's like, oh, Western Union, because they already are separated from, they can't access Venmo, they can't access PayPal. Like so many things are already not available just because Palestine is not on the drop-down menu. And if you put Israel, you'll have to have an Israeli bank account, and you can't have an Israeli bank account if you're Muslim. So it's like you're already effectively blocked from like the economy outside of Palestine, but then inside it's also extremely depressed right now economically. These are more walls in the camp, which I just like them because it's like they're blank stone walls. I just love how they've decorated them to treat, to make them their own. This is a Banksy remake on the wall here, kind of a famous Banksy. And then this is also from the museum, and this from the walk to the museum. Just a reminder, like I was saying, that Bethlehem there's a lot of Christians in Bethlehem. It's where, any Christian in the region is Palestinian, right, is Arab. And Christianity was a Middle Eastern religion. Christianity was birthed literally in Bethlehem, Palestine. And I was there during Holy Week, Christian Holy Week. I was also there during Ramadan, but I was there during Christian Holy Week, and just I never noticed any sort of angst or discord between anyone during these two very holy times between Muslims and Christians in Palestine. You'd have the call to prayer from the mosque 5 times a day, and then I would just hear the church bells from the Church of the Nativity going. It was never like there wasn't this conflict that I think is really hard to imagine being in America. Like I can't imagine the uproar that would happen if our mosque actually did a call to prayer in Corvallis. But so a lot of the folks that I was working with were just a blend of Muslims and Christians working together and totally respecting each other. There's a lot of obviously just like imagery about the wall and Mary and Jesus. And then this is another example, just kind of photographic evidence of like a very common kind of thing I was witnessing is this like nun and friar person. And then it's time to pray, and they're praying. It was just like, and this is in the Israeli building as I'm trying to get into Jordan. So, so there's, yeah, it was just an interesting, I wanted to catch at least one scene. I never took pictures of people praying except for this time. And I just thought it was a good example of like that region and like flowing together. So this is, Samud is a word that was used a lot to explain when I asked questions about like, I don't know, like when I was there, I would get frustrated very easily because I live in America and I have a lot of more, I don't know, like they were jokingly saying to me, like, you're like the most violent person here. Cause I would like be like, oh, that soldier, I just want to like, oh, and they're like, calm down, just like go plant some flowers and chill out. Like, and we were able, where we were, there were like fighter jets flying to Gaza over us. And it was like, I wanted like a Hunger Games moment, like I wanted a little Katniss action. And they were like, no, you just need to keep going and like eat a good meal and like enjoy your time. And that is also a way to resist and to protest. And so Samud is kind of that phrase. This is also from the Banksy Museum, to reinforce that, to be resilient. And they were telling me while I was there, like, everyone's like, free Palestine. They're like, free America. Like, you need Samud going back. Like, your country is about to go through a lot. It's already going through a lot, but like, there's a fight to fight here that needs to be addressed. Just they're like, we're good. We're worried about you all, like kind of jokingly, but also true. And so I really am grateful that I got to like have a felt experience of like developing a little bit of Samud while I was there. Yes. And then I didn't talk about all this, but yeah, these are some contact info. This is from a different presentation I did. So I have my personal email on there, but you can totally copy it down if you want. I didn't mean to leave it up. And then the museum that I stayed at is amazing. And if any of you are students and you're interested in like biodiversity, sustainability, etc., I would definitely recommend you check them out. They're connected with the University of Bethlehem in Bethlehem. So let's make some study abroads happen or something. And then UNRWA is who funds and takes care of Dehisha Camp, and that's just an important organization. Okay, that's all. Sorry. I'm so awkward. Why? Let me take this off. I'm fired from this.
Hey, y'all. I don't want to like disturb the mic, so we're gonna take 5 minutes so I can set up the food for you. You guys can start getting some food, and then we'll proceed with the Q&A.
Just stop recording today.